I played this character called Jim, who we learned through the course of the story was in his previous life like a bike courier in London, and he wakes up out of a coma in a hospital, and the hospital is just completely abandoned and deserted, and he walks out into this St. Thomas's Hospital, walks out into Westminster Bridge, and London is just desolate and abandoned, and there's sort of signs of that something unusual has gone down, and he's just wandering around, and then he encounters these characters who have survived, and bit by bit he begins to realise what has happened, and it's about his journey and to survive, and the people he meets as well, their journey to survive.
When the world inevitably comes to an end and your small life view is shattered, how will you feel? Would you give up completely, drowning in your sorrows? Would you do your best to survive in a world that is no longer yours, constantly grieving over what you've lost? Would you feel anger or sorrow, or both? Would you fight, or would you reside and hide away, shielding yourself from the fucked up world around you? But maybe
It was longer than a heartbeat. Listen, it's not all fucked.
this is 28 Days Later, and it's my favorite movie of all time. 28 Days Later is my favorite movie ever made. 28 Days Later is a game changer and a horror icon. 28 Days Later follows Jim, a man who wakes up from a coma only to find his life has changed forever. We aren't told anything about Jim besides his first name, his job, and the fact that he loves his family. That's it. We don't need a long backstory about him, he's just written as a normal dude. His name is literally Jim. That's as simple as it gets without naming your character Bob. Jim is an everyman, a type of dude who lives a normal day-to-day life just like the rest of us. In fact, this goes for all the characters in this movie. We don't get told anything immediately about them besides their first names, we just watch them develop as a character as the situation progresses. This movie is about ordinary people versus the apocalypse. This movie, for reasons I plan to get into, is the perfect zombie movie. But all I'm saying is that there's a reason that people remember this movie so fondly and hold it to such high standards, and today I want to talk about why that is. And before we get deep and analytical into the story, I want to talk about the filmmaking.
I think the premise that we could be eviscerated by ourselves really is an absolutely plausible one. I mean, it's whether it would be through a psychological virus caused rage, I don't know. But one of the reasons that the film works, I think, is that people do connect with it to a kind of malaise they feel about life at the moment, and certainly a kind of threat amongst ourselves as human beings of what we're doing to each other. That's something that people clearly connect with.
This film is made by a filmmaker of a vision, Danny Boyle, and a crew that cared about making this film perfect. And so much went into that. This whole film is shot on a video camera. You've heard the stories, they had little to no time to film the empty streets of London and had to use a video camera to save time. In the director's commentary, Danny Boyle states that they stopped traffic for a couple minutes at a time, giving them 2 minutes to 90 seconds to film. That's incredible. That's commitment. But honestly, it works in this film's favor. The grainy and dark look really brings out the atmosphere of the movie.
Well, it's important to know where they are, because they have so many of them that on a few occasions, you might just go, and there's a camera there, so you have to be aware of it all the time, but it's great because you can get so many different perspectives and you can do things that you can't do with big 35mm cameras. I think it's fantastic.
It feels gross and choppy, and that's kind of the point. It does nothing but invest you in the world that Danny Boyle has created. The crew worked their asses off to make one of the most populated cities in the world feel barren. They had to constantly reshoot scenes because a car would drive by. And well, CGI wasn't very reliable in 2002, so they had to cut certain shots, which gives this movie this choppy and crazy feel, which is now iconic at this point. The cinematography was done by Anthony Mantle, and if not for them, this movie probably wouldn't have amazing shots like this and this. Now you might be thinking, what can this dorky white kid add to this movie? What could you possibly say that hasn't been said before by more talented creators and critics? Well, not much, honestly. Personally, the type of content I love on YouTube the most is when someone just talks about something they're passionate about, and that's kind of what this video is meant to be. Hell, most of my channel has been dedicated to lengthy videos about things that I like. But what is love for a movie? Well, I love a lot of movies, but what makes this movie special for me? What makes this movie my favorite film ever made? You know when you love a movie so much that you can't think of a singular part that you don't like? No part that drags on for too long or is too short. No part that makes you think, oh, it's this part again, I can go on Twitter now. Think of that movie that manages to keep your attention during every rewatch as if it was the first. Think of that movie you watch when your world feels like it's caving in, when you feel like there's no hope left in the world. Now tell me why you love that movie. It's not easy, is it? It's a personal feeling. This video is personal. I'm not gonna say this movie is perfect, hell, what really is? But I will say 28 Days Later is damn near close to it, and I love it with all my heart. Arguably one of the most important aspects of any horror movie is the opening scene. How do you start your film in a way that will stick with the audience and establish the major themes you're working with? Some films are excellent in this matter, such as Scream, Halloween, and this film's sequel, but how well does this opening scene hold up? Well, pretty fucking well. The movie opens with intense and horrifying violence only to zoom out to reveal an ape tied to a table, observing the violence in front of him. The audience is immediately filled with questions. What is this place? What's going on? An animal rights group enters the lab to find several mutilated animals and sees several more in cages. They begin taking pictures and searching for a way to free them, when suddenly, the scientist pleads with them, begging them not to open the cages. He tells them they're infected with
Rage.
This idea that there's a psychological virus causes this apocalypse. You know, we've all seen movies about biological viruses being released and causing mayhem and stuff like this. But there was this premise in it, this slightly projected premise, this sci-fi idea that it's a psychological virus. Now, nobody knows if they exist or not, psychological viruses. We don't know yet. They may do, they may not. But the idea, and that it was linked to rage or this social intolerance that is everywhere now, appears to be everywhere, certainly in this country, certainly in Britain, and that somehow that this might escape and run rampant across the country and create these monsters that just kill people, and that the monsters are us, really, in a way, that there's not something that we can blame on something else like aliens or something terrible mutation of biology. This is actually something that comes out of what we're like.
The room falls quiet after this reveal, and it really sets the mood. The scientists simply saying they're infected with rage is a horrifying concept. What could it possibly mean? Even though he pleads and pleads with them, they ignore him, choosing to open the cages anyway. Him trying to desperately stop them as he's restrained shows how serious the situation is. As the door opens, the ape doesn't even hesitate to attack. This film's amazing editing comes into play here. These intense shots are super close, and oftentimes they're repeated to give you a feeling of distortion and make you feel like you're there. It'd be hard to know what was happening sometimes if it wasn't for this film's amazing sound design. After the girl is infected, one of the activists beats the ape to death, something they tried so hard to save, they had no choice to kill. The girl immediately begins vomiting blood everywhere on the ground and in her friend's face. The scientist repeatedly stresses that they need to kill her before it's too late. He grabs a stool and... We don't see the infected for very long at all before she attacks him. As she kills him off screen, we hear nothing but his screams. The only sight we see are the apes encouraging the violence from behind the glass. This intro is perfect. The amount of time we're presented with it gives us enough information to understand that something terrible is happening. We don't learn anything about the characters in this scene besides their motives. The activists want to free the animals at whatever cost, and the scientist will stop at nothing to make sure the rage virus doesn't escape. He wants to make sure that they contain it forever and eventually destroy it before the consequences he knows will soon follow. 28 days after the initial outbreak in the lab, a man by the name of Jim wakes up in the hospital. I love the attention to detail in this scene. The paste over his eyelids showing how long he's been there and how skinny Cillian Murphy was for the filming of this movie.
The film begins with this guy, he wakes up in the hospital, he's naked in an intensive care unit, and there's nobody in the room with him. And the key has been left. He's been locked in the room, but the key has been slid under the door and left for him. So he can open and go out into the rest of the hospital. He goes out into the rest of the hospital, there's nobody there either. He walks, it's a central London hospital, it's St Thomas's just over Westminster Bridge. He walks over Westminster Bridge towards the Houses of Parliament, there's nobody. And no matter how much he shouts or calls, there's nothing, just silence.
The scene that follows is also amazing, unforgettable. We watch him as he walks through the hospital, searching for somebody, anybody, but finding no one. The camera work here is amazing, giving you the feeling of isolation and showing you how alone Jim is. The camera is far away from him, showing how small he is compared to the large empty surroundings. As Jim exits the hospital, we get the most iconic scene of the movie. Jim exploring the empty streets of London is one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in any film ever. This is how you show the severity of a situation. Buildings aren't on fire and cars don't line the streets, it's just emptiness. The only sounds in the scene are Jim's footsteps, the slowly building music, and the desperate cries that he lets out.
Everybody loves the London stuff, and it's certainly been a great calling card for us for the film, as a premise for the film to show very quickly, for instance, on TV adverts and stuff like that. You just show a snippet of it, and people are fascinated by it because everybody knows that London is an impossible city to live in, let alone to empty, you know. But basically what we did is we did it very, very simply. We turned up very, very early in the morning. We had a lot of cameras, digital cameras, because we were able to use a lot of them, so that we could capture enough material in 2 minutes of the traffic being held back to create a sequence so that you would feel like the camera's moving around town with him. So there were 3 or 4 shots and the editor could spin them out so that they felt like it was a protracted space he was walking over. In fact, it's only like 2 minutes, 90 seconds that the traffic will be held for. Because even at that time of the morning, and even with a lot of traffic marshals who were usually very pretty girls that we sent out to ask motorists to wait, please, even then you only get 2 minutes of tolerance from people before they go, oh no, I've got to go to work. You know, and they go back into the rage, really, which we all exist in cities. And that's how we did it.
The music in this movie is spectacular, and I feel like this is a perfect time to mention it. It correlates perfectly with the scene. It starts out quiet and ominous, but slowly builds as Jim makes his way deeper into the city. It eventually builds into a very intense and aggressive tone as Jim starts realizing what happened. The music comes to a high as Jim reaches the missing persons bulletin board. The music as well as the editing becomes quicker, almost frantic. The audience at this point still knows more than Jim does, but as he enters the chapel, we feel the tension he does. The scene is shot slowly, almost hesitantly, like how Jim is moving. Jim's not here necessarily because he's religious. He shows no proof of being religious later in the movie. It's just because he's in search for someone. Anybody. Because his biggest fear is being alone. He doesn't find what he's looking for. Instead, he finds a pile of corpses would be upsetting for anyone, yes. But Jim has been searching for anyone he can find for as long as he can remember. This is horrifying. It isn't a loud noise or meaningless jump scare that leaves no lingering fear. It's complete silence except for the quiet music and frantic breathing. The men just stare at Jim, and that is horror. And as the priest enters the room, the tension grows. The music is gone at this point, and all we hear is the gasping and raspy gurgles of the man as Jim pleads with him, trying to get anything out of the man, but he lunges at him. The priest begins desperately clawing at Jim, and Jim takes it as a sign to get the fuck out. The music from earlier comes back into tuition and it feels more tense than ever as a large group of infected chase Jim out of the chapel and down the street. The editing is frantic, the audience feels like they're there being chased alongside Jim.
Any film that you've got a monster in, you've got to make it work. It's got to be individual, it's got to be, it's got to be different, individual, and it's got to scare people. There's no two ways about it. There's no point making a film that has some monsters in it that are not scary. And you know how to make people jump in the cinema and things like that, but actually you've got to create this monster that's actually, the very presence of it makes you frightened, really. And you put a lot of effort into that, to making that work. There's a development of that, which is that by the end of the film you want to, ideally, feel a relationship with the monster as well.
The shot changes about every second and gets progressively closer to Jim as the infected begin catching up. As Jim is chased down the street, 2 survivors throw Molotovs at the infected, causing them to increase speed as they become more desperate. I would also love to mention the amazing sound design for the infected. It's this terrifying, bellowing scream that doesn't even sound human anymore. It sounds like if someone tried to do it, it would completely shatter their vocal cords. See what I mean? The survivors then blow up a gas station in an amazing explosion that costs $250,000 to do. The group heads to a subway station and locks himself in a shop. This one interaction teaches us so much about these two new characters, Mark and Selena. Mark is more relaxed and Selena is all business all the time. In the time we spend with Selena and the short time we spend with Mark, we learn about their beliefs caused by the infection. Mark feels a strong sense of anger towards the infected for killing his family. He believes the living need to. He lives with anger in his heart and he hides that by joking and being sarcastic. Selena, on the other hand, believes survival is as good as it gets. Selena is entirely motivated by her will to survive and will do anything necessary to benefit herself. Jim's beliefs are different from these two. He believes in human connection because he needs human connection. Everybody needs human connection. Selena tells Jim what happened in one of the most iconic movie scenes of all time.
It started as writing, and then it wasn't on the TV anymore. It was in the street outside. It was coming through your windows.
Upon hearing this news, Jim becomes immediately worried about his parents. This is when we fully see his desire to be in a family. He tries to get out of the store even though the two of them are persuading him not to. He'll die. But he's so desperate that he just tunes them out completely. The two of them promise to take him in the morning if he just calms the fuck down. What follows is a scene of them traversing the empty streets of London. They walk across the abandoned train tracks, and one of my favorite shots in the movie. They eventually make it to Jim's parents' house, and he doesn't hesitate to run inside. This is probably a good time to discuss the set design of this film. Jim's parents' house feels warm and inviting with its yellows and oranges, but the mansion at the end of the film feels cold, almost unlivable. Jim finds his parents dead from an overdose. All Jim has left for him is a note from his beloved parents telling him not to wake up. We feel Jim's pain and can understand his grief until the next scene. This monologue is a perfect way to include exposition into a movie. Everything about this is done with care to get the point across to the audience without them losing their interest. Everything works together from the performance to the cinematography, it's just amazing. The over-the-shoulder shot and Selena's head blocking out the rest of the screen puts the audience focused directly on Mark. It's kind of like we're in his head. And the cherry on top of this well-cooked cake is the amazing sound design. As the story progresses, a quiet but loud screaming can be heard in the background. The screaming of dozens, the screaming of Mark's loved ones. The screaming that is forever burnt into Mark's head. The scene ends with a dope-ass shot showing the passage of time. Mark and Selena are passed out on the couch, but Jim is in the distance exploring his kitchen. The warm feel of his house is now completely gone and we're shrouded in darkness once again. Jim lights a candle and has a flashback of his parents, and how far Jim has come from this reality, and how he'll never see it again. And if the audience is getting bored of Jim talking to a wall, Danny Boyle throws an infected into the mix. This is probably the most effective scare in the entire film. It's one of those blink and you'll miss it moments. We have two simple shots of the infected's perspective, and we don't have time to process what's happening before it happens. And that's what makes this film's horror so impactful. This film is terrific at building tension, and it manages to keep that tension building for the rest of the scene. Fun fact, both of those shots of the infected were actually just taken in Danny Boyle's backyard. I think that's a fun fact.
I've never worked at anything like that where there's such a massive body count. It's incredible, and just buckets and gallons of spewy bile and edible vomit and all sorts of different variations on blood. But you become immune to it. I mean, you know, you'll be sitting down having your lunch, head to foot, and you know, just. So yeah, you do become. It's been fun. You have to laugh at stuff like that because some of it is very black, you know, and you just gotta laugh at it and you gotta joke about it. Like.
This is the first time that Jim's been uncomfortably close to the infected, and he could have died here if not for Mark and Selena saving him in a violent and well-edited scene that completely destroys any remaining comfort of Jim's home. This scene and this scene are only a couple minutes apart, and if that's not cool to you, then I'm sorry. I don't think we can be friends. Jim would have been dead in this scene if not for Mark. They could have taken Jim being attacked as an opportunity to escape, but Mark wouldn't allow that to happen. Mark believes that they need to fight back, and because of this belief, Mark is infected.
Any of the blood get in your mouth? Mark?
Mark stares Selena directly in the eyes. Before he can even begin to speak, Selena lunges at him. We just met the character Mark, and now we have to watch him die. And I think that really shows the tone that this movie is going for and achieves 100% of the time. Mark was Selena's only friend throughout the entire outbreak, and without a moment of hesitation, she kills him. That shows us where the world has gone in only a month. For Selena, all that matters is survival and what's happening right now. The only reason she helped Jim, the only reason she took him to his parents' house is because Mark wanted to. If it was up to her, they would have stayed in the fucking train station where it's safe. Jim wants to know how she knew he was infected, and she replies, "I didn't." Selena did not know for sure that Mark was infected, but she had to trust her gut, and her gut said to put herself before him.
For the two young leads, if you like, Jim and Selena, we wanted people that weren't really known. We didn't really want stars to be in it, so we kept the budget down so that we wouldn't have to have a movie star in the parts, because we felt that they should be Mr. and Mrs. Anybody, really, that they should be just people off the streets that you didn't have any previous relationship or history with. So we found this guy, Jim. We found Cillian Murphy, this Irish actor, and this girl, Naomi Harris, to play Selena. And it's easy to find inexperienced actors who haven't got much track record, but of course the danger is that they won't be able to carry the film. And they've done a wonderful job, because they've been able to actually, you experience and you'll get carried through the whole film by these two.
Jim and Selena leave the house and begin walking. They have no set destination, they're just left with no choice. As they walk, we get a simple scene of dialogue that teaches us a lot about both of these characters. Selena basically tells Jim to his face that she would kill him without a moment's hesitation, just like she did Mark, if it meant her own survival. She mocks the idea of plans and finishes by saying survival's as good as it gets. That belief is something Jim questions, and begins to change throughout the movie. They spot flashing lights coming from a building in the distance and begin making their way inside. They spot a large pile of shopping carts. Shopping trolleys. Ugh. They begin climbing the stairs only for Jim to suffer a headache. This is because all of the sugar he's been eating. Selena actually takes the time to help him here because she can see that he's genuinely in pain. Selena likes to act like she only cares about herself, but under the mask she wears you can tell her humanity is still intact. A couple infected make their way inside the building, likely attracted by the flashing lights. They begin to chase a duo up the stairs, and this really dramatic, really intense chase scene begins, where Selena sprints ahead of Jim, and Jim begs her to stay and help him.
Selena! Wait for me, please!
He screams for Selena to wait, and the terror in his voice mixed with the bellows of the infected is terrifying. They reach the top of the stairs and find a man decked out in SWAT gear. He directs them down the hall to his flat, immediately showing his differences from people like Selena. Whilst he is welcoming, she is cold and distant. The man ruthlessly kills the infected, showing his inner rage and hatred for them for killing his wife. The man invites him into his flat, and this is where we learn that he has a daughter named Hannah.
So, I'm Frank anyway. Jim. This is my daughter, Hannah.
His daughter is distant and quiet. They both lost someone important to them, and they're choosing to grieve differently. Frank does what he believes his wife would want him to do, while Hannah is a complete shutoff. They have a celebratory drink, just happy that they've met other survivors. Frank and his daughter Hannah are surprisingly welcoming considering their situation. They have little to no food, and the water they've been drinking has been out of the fucking fish tank. Jim shaves and talks to Selena about their newly found friends. Jim likes them, but Selena tells him that doesn't matter, that he'll have to think of if they'll slow him down or not. Selena's value is placed in people based around their likelihood of survival. If someone slows her down, she'll leave them behind in a heartbeat. She insists this even though she's already shown that it's not completely true. She tells Jim there's no such thing as trustworthy. He's gonna get himself killed with that kind of mindset, which is kind of a nod to the ending that never came to be. Selena believes Frank and Hannah need Selena and Jim more than they need Frank and Hannah. Realizing she's unwilling to budge, Jim attempts to thank her, but she brushes him off completely. It's not that she regrets helping him, it's just that she's afraid to let him in. The next day, Frank tells Jim about their dwindling water supplies and how desperate they've become, drinking fish water and all, and putting over 1,000 buckets on top of the roof. Frank knows they can't stay there and attempts to show the rest of the group a radio broadcast he's been listening to. Selena is quick to assume that they're dead, but Frank fights her on it. You can really see the desperation in him, and he admits that him and Hannah do need Selena and Jim. He knows they need to leave, but if just him and his daughter left and something happened to him, what would come of Hannah? She's only a kid, how is she expected to defend herself? He asks him to come with, and Selena's hesitant until Hannah finally speaks up.
Get that help?
Just so you know, I don't take checks or credit cards.
I fucking love that so much, showing them drive off as the spiritual music plays in the background. It's just perfect in a way I can't explain. On the road trip, they see horrible things such as crashed cars and piles of corpses. This pit is used like the chapel was in the beginning of the movie, just more storage for the amount of dead. The group comes across an underground tunnel, a very obviously dangerous place, but the quickest route to the other side of the river. Jim is hesitant, even mocking the idea of going through it.
Most direct route to the other side of the river.
No. Then we should take the indirect route, the one that's in broad daylight and that's not underground.
But Frank goes in anyway. As they begin driving towards a pile of cars, Jim's mocking turns into a sort of an insult. There doesn't seem to be a way around the cars, so Frank decides, fuck it, let's just drive over them. The group screams as Frank does this, but their screams turn into laughter. This is probably the first time we've heard genuine laughter the entire film. But of course, the fun is short-lived. The group begins replacing the tire when they hear it. Not the infected, not some loud jump scare, but something different. Most of these rats are done in post, but the scene is still really effective. But what are the rats running from? It's introduced by a shadow, and then...
Running from the infected.
The infected don't start their routine screaming until the audience is already caught onto the threat. The group becomes frantic, moving as fast as possible. You can hear the fear in Selena's voice because of the amazing performance from the actress. This scene is one of my favorites in the entire film, even though I'll probably say that since it's 100 times more in this video. But seriously, this scene is just another example of how to direct horror super well. Hannah begins counting as she screws the tire, kind of doubling down as a countdown until they become prey. They make it into the car at the last second, and we get a terrifying shot of the infected slamming himself into the back of the window. The red lights of the back cab bounce off him perfectly, highlighting his red eyes. The group barely escapes the tunnel, as Jim mocks the infected through the window. A lot of people make fun of how the relentless infected just kinda give up in this scene, but come on guys, they're human beings, give the actors a break, okay? They've been breathing toxic fumes the entire scene. The group arrives at a grocery store that hasn't been raided yet, and okay, this is probably my favorite scene in the whole movie. Probably. Maybe. I don't know. The group get a moment of solidarity as they shop their heart's content. This scene is a Romero homage, and you can tell. I'll probably make a video about that film eventually. I love the shot of the rotting fruit except for the apples that Frank takes. I think it's kind of a metaphor for how the group is surrounded by rotten death, but they still manage to stay fresh. It was really fucking stupid. 3,000 IQ statements only on this channel. We can also see in this scene how Selena has become more relaxed and comfortable around her newly founded companions. She definitely builds a bond with Hannah quickly, probably feeling a sense of relatability to her, but because she's also lost in this new world just like Selena is. Frank and Jim share a really funny moment where Frank reads over a description for wine while Jim clearly doesn't give a shit and just walks away. The scene ends with the group laughing as they exit the store with carts filled with food. The scene is capped off with Frank leaving his debit card on the counter, expecting he'll never need it again.
It was a brilliant experience making that film. You know, it was a really kind of game changer for me, working with Danny Boyle and working with Alex Garland, and the film did so well, you know, and I do see, I don't really watch zombie stuff, but we were the first people to make zombies run, you know, and changed everything. So yeah, it's a very special place in my heart, that movie.